gracious good day to one and all once again. 'Tis I, Norton the First, by grace of God, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. Back with you all, once again for episode number 165 of Emperor Norton's fantastic history vlog. Today is November 18, 2020. It is our 247th day living under COVID-19 restrictions. On this episode, we will be covering November 18 through the 24th. So welcome, everybody. One small note at the beginning, as regular viewers will know, we had resumed doing tours as of the beginning of November. But COVID conditions have changed immensely around us, and we are now seeing another wave, a big spike. Not so bad here in San Francisco. Now, we moved from yellow to red, which is 2 tiers up, but most of the rest of the Bay Area is now under purple conditions, and restrictions are back in place. We will be doing 2 more tours this month, the next 2 Saturdays, and then that's it until things open up more. Again, we were hoping to be back on a more permanent basis on Saturdays, but that's the way it goes. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But just remember, if people had been following guidelines during the summer or the spring, everything would probably be back to relatively normal by now. So wear your masks. It's affecting my business. So let's begin, as we always do, with our national days. The 18th we'll begin with is National Princess Day. Well, we're not a princess, we're an emperor. When's Emperor's Day? Moving on to the 19th, the Great American Smokeout. Excuse me. The 20th, National Absurdity Day. Well, there's something that appeals to us greatly. Credo quia absurdum. The 21st, False Confessions Day. I shot JFK. The 22nd, Start Your Own Country Day. I think we already did that. The 23rd, National Espresso Day. Have an espresso on the 23rd. And the 24th, here's something we all can get behind, I think. National Parfait Day. Sounds good. Well, let's move on next to our Florida Man segment. We have 3 today. Couldn't choose. They're also good, bad. I don't know. You judge for yourselves. Starting with the 19th, Florida man arrested for having sex with miniature horse on multiple occasions, deputies say. The 21st, Florida man demands less money during bank robbery. Not very good at his job, I guess. And the 22nd, Florida man says he stabbed father who wanted to circumcise him. I hope he was an adult, or maybe I don't hope he was an adult, but because that would really hurt. I don't know about that one. Well, nonetheless, let's move on to our San Francisco stories for today. And as we so often do, we rely on John Ralston's wonderful book, This Date in San Francisco. And we have 3 today because they're all pretty significant, beginning with November 18, 1978, the People's Temple murder-suicides. The People's Temple was founded by Reverend Jim Jones, born in Indiana in 1931. He was a student pastor of the Indianapolis Methodist Church in 1954 when he left the church after a dispute over interracial worship. Jones was alienated from mainstream religion, which he considered racist and exclusive, adopting a doctrine that was part Christianity and part socialism. People's Temple drew many members from minorities, Blacks, Asian, and American Indians. Jones claimed to be part Indian himself. By the late 1960s, it also drawn a number of young, educated whites, particularly female. Organizationally, however, People's Temple was pyramidal. Jones at the top, a tier of whites below him, and below them, a rank and file of mostly laboring urban minorities. People's Temple left Redwood Valley and transferred to a former San Francisco synagogue that Jones had bought at 1859 Geary Boulevard on the south side of the block west of Fillmore. With a disciplined membership estimated at 4,000, Jones became a political force in the 1970s. In 1972, the Examiner ran a series criticizing Jones as a phony faith healer and calling attention to armed guards at People's Temple services. In summer 1977, New West magazine ran another series. Former People's Temple members told of Jones performing fake miracles and enforcing discipline with physical and mental torture. In the mid-1970s, People's Temple acquired property in Guyana in South America and began relocating almost its entire membership in a jungle clearing called Jonestown. Concerned relatives, a group of members' relatives, pressed for an investigation. On November 14, 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan, a Democrat from San Mateo County, flew with aides, journalists, and members of concerned relatives to Timehri International Airport, Georgetown, Guyana. On the 17th, Ryan's party flew on a de Havilland Twin Otter to an airstrip at Point Kaituma, about 7 miles from Jonestown. Arriving at Jonestown, they were given a tour and fed. On Saturday, the 18th, after Ryan had completed his interviews, NBC correspondent Don Harris told Jim Jones that several members of People's Temple wanted to leave with Ryan. Ryan's party was glad to be going. They had a scuffle in which Ryan was attacked with a knife, but blood on his shirt was his attackers. About 4:30 p.m., Ryan was back at the airstrip when a second plane had arrived for the defectors. As Ryan and others were about to board, 2 trucks appeared out of the jungle. Several men opened fire with revolvers, shotguns, and other weapons. Ryan was hit, along with Chronicle reporter Ron Javers, Examiner photographer Gregory Robinson, and NBC cameraman Robert Brown, who filmed the attackers even as they advanced. As Ryan and others lay wounded, the attackers killed them with gunshot blasts at close range. 5 died, 10 were wounded. Ryan's legal aide, Jackie Spear, was hit 5 times, but survived. Back at Jonestown, Jones reportedly heard that his gunmen had failed to kill Ryan's entire party. Knowing that authorities would come, he reportedly told members, "The time has come to meet in another place." Temple defectors had reported a rehearsal of mass suicides. Now Jones had cyanide poured into a huge soup kettle mixed possibly with Kool-Aid. In a mass perversion of the early Christian martyrdoms, the mix was given first to infants too young to drink by themselves, then children took it, then adults. Jones was found with a bullet through his head. Over 900 People's Temple members died of cyanide poisoning on November 18, 1978. The murder-suicides haunt inspiring books, articles, and at least one documentary trying to explain how such a horror could have happened. San Francisco would suffer more tragedy the same month, and that will be in the next episode. Let us move on to November 19, 1884. Adolf Spreckel shoots Michael Deyoung. The Chronicle had been started in 1865 by Charles and M.H. Deyoung as the Daily Dramatic Chronicle, a free sheet of events, comment, and advertising. Becoming a regular newspaper in 1868, it was soon distinguished as a scandal sheet. The paper's tactics cost Charles Deyoung his life in 1880 when the Reverend Isaac M. Collick, whose father Deyoung had shot and wounded, shot Deyoung dead in the Chronicle offices. Just a year later, surviving brother Michael M.H. Deyoung, who seems not to have learned from his brother's example, began the first of 120 attacks on sugar magnate Klaus Spreckels, accusing him, among other things, of using slave labor in Hawaii and ruining his company for personal advantage. The attacks culminated on Sunday, November 16, 1884, when the Chronicle ran a story under the headline, "Angry Stockholders," purportedly an account of how Spreckels left his stockholders holding the bag while he planned a European holiday. An editorial on Monday, the 17th, suggested that Klaus Spreckels and the company directors should be prosecuted. Klaus's 27-year-old son Adolf had been brooding over the attacks on his family when he believed were instigated by rival Eastern sugar refiners, and had continued because the Spreckels family would not pay off Deyoung. About 5 p.m. on Wednesday the 19th, Deyoung went to have a look at the building he was having erected on Lower Geary Street. Turning north up Kearny, he came face-to-face with Adolf Spreckels, accompanied by a friend. They passed each other, and Spreckels turned and followed Deyoung to the Chronicle building at the northeast corner of Bush and Kearny. Deyoung entered the very office where his brother Charles had been shot, with Spreckels close behind. Spreckels said, "Mr. Deyoung?" What happened next is not quite clear. In an interview in the rival Call, Spreckel said that Deyoung reached as if for a gun. Spreckels drew his own revolver and fired, hitting Deyoung in the left shoulder. Deyoung dropped behind a counter and grabbed a stool as if to shield himself, and Spreckels hit Deyoung with a second shot. An assistant Chronicle bookkeeper, George Emerson, shot Spreckels in the left arm, disabling him, and he was overpowered by Chronicle staff. Spreckels and Deyoung both recovered. Spreckels went on trial for assault to commit murder on January 31st, 1885. Defended by prominent lawyer Hall McAllister, namesake of McAllister Street, he was acquitted the following July. And our last story from today is from November 20th, 1969. Native Americans occupy Alcatraz Island. Alcatraz was originally applied to the island now known as Yerba Buena by Jose de Canizares, cartographer of the Spanish ship San Carlos, which entered San Francisco Bay in 1775. The island doubled as a military prison until 1933. It was also a fort. When the federal government put Alcatraz to its most famous use as a maximum security prison for dangerous criminals. Infamous prisoners on the Rock included Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and the Birdman of Alcatraz, Robert Stroud, who had no birds on Alcatraz. Discipline was severe and the guard-prisoner ratio high. By 1963, Alcatraz prison had outlived its usefulness. It cost the government almost $14 a day to house Alcatraz inmates compared to just over $5 at other prisons. The prison was closed, the prisoners sent to other penitentiaries. In 1962, Bay Area Indians, including Pomos, Navajos, Chippewas, and Paiutes, and others, organized the United Council, chaired by Adam Fortunate Eagle, a Minnesota Chippewa. In March 1964, about 40 Dakota Sioux, claiming rights to the island under an 1868 treaty that entitled Indians to land abandoned by the federal government, chartered a boat to Alcatraz and claimed it before an island caretaker. The caretaker said, good-naturedly, that the Indians could have it if they wanted it. No one else did. The acting warden, summoned from home, was not amused. Threatened with arrest, the Indians left. In October 1969, the Indian Cultural and Social Center on Valencia Street burned down. The building was temporarily replaced, but its loss led to another Indian move on Alcatraz. In the evening of November 9th, a party of 3 women and 11 men, quote, invaded, unquote, Alcatraz. The third occupation lasted 19 months. The national Indian community was electrified. Non-Indian sympathizers, contributed food, medical care, legal advice, and other necessities. As many as 200 Indians occupied Alcatraz at a time. In the end, the project stagnated. 2 fires mysteriously broke out, one destroying the Victorian warden's home. On June 11, 1971, 20 armed federal marshals removed 15 remaining occupiers. 3 men were charged with stealing copper wire for resale, and although they were convicted, the presiding federal judge, critical of the government's case, sentenced them only to probation. The occupation, however, focused national attention on Alcatraz, which became one of the first attractions of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. And every Thanksgiving at dawn, the island is occupied once again by Native Americans. So that's coming up. Well, let's move on to our other history for today. Beginning on the 18th of November, 1307, William Tell reputedly shoots an apple off his son's head. 1626, St. Peter's Basilica is consecrated, replacing an earlier basilica on the same site and becoming the world's largest Christian basilica. 1865, Mark Twain publishes Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, the story that would make him famous. But we still have a grudge against him for making us the king in Huckleberry Finn. 1872, suffragette Susan B. Anthony is arrested by U.S. Deputy Marshal and charged with illegally voting. 1920, the Apollo Theater opens at 221 West 42nd Street, New York City, Harlem. 1928, Steamboat Willie, the first talking cartoon, premieres. 1933, one of our favorite movies, the Marx Brothers Duck Soup, premieres. And we just cannot let an opportunity go by without a little bit of an imitation of Groucho. So here goes This is from Duck Soup. It is sung by Rufus T. Firefly. The last man nearly ruined this place. He didn't know what to do with it. If you think this country's bad off now, just wait till I get through with it. Don't want to waste a perfectly good cigar. By the way, if any of you out there would ever like to purchase a cigar for the Empire, Avo. These are the best. If you've never tried one and you like cigars, these are my favorite. So, just so you know. Moving on. 1936, the main span of the Golden Gate Bridge is joined. Where are we here? 1961. I think I said 1936 in the early one. If I didn't, I correct myself. 1961, JFK, President John F. Kennedy sends 18,000 military advisors to South Vietnam. That's kind of the official start of the war in Vietnam. 1964, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover describes Martin Luther King as, quote, a most notorious liar. 1969, prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi is assigned to the Tate LaBianca murders and will eventually convict Charles Manson for orchestrating the killings. Moving on to the 19th now, 1805, Lewis, Clark, and Sacagawea reached the Pacific Ocean, the first European Americans to cross the West. 1850, Alfred Tennyson becomes British Poet Laureate, replacing William Wordsworth. 1863, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln delivers his Gettysburg Address beginning 77 years ago. 1873, Boss Tweed of Tammany Hall in New York City is convicted of defrauding the city of $6 million and is sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. 1959, Ford Motors cancels its poorly received Edsel model. 1965, Kellogg's Pop-Tarts pastries are created. 1970, Golden Gate Park's Conservatory of Flowers becomes a California State Historical Landmark. It is so beautiful. If you've never been to the conservatory, do it. It's so worth it. 1976, Patty Hearst is freed on $15 million bail. Let's move on to the 20th. 1934, Lillian Hellman's Children's Hour premieres in New York City. 1945, the Nuremberg war trials begin, as 24 Nazi leaders are put on trial before judges representing the victorious Allied powers. 1984, McDonald's makes its 50 billionth burger. Where are they at now? If I can find the answer to that, I'll put it below. 1992, Queen Elizabeth's home, Windsor Castle, catches fire. Most unfortunate. 1998, the first module of the International Space Station, Zarya, is launched. 2013, U.S. President Barack Obama posthumously awards civil rights activist Bayard Rustin the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Let's move on to the 21st now. 1824, the first Jewish Reform congregation forms, I believe just in the U.S., in Charleston, South Carolina. First ones, I believe, were in Germany. 1953, authorities of the British Natural History Museum announced the Piltdown Man skull. One of the most famous fossil skulls in the world is a hoax. 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy flies to Texas. 1973, U.S. President Richard Nixon's attorney, J. Fred Buzzard, reveals the presence of the 18-minute gap in a Waterhouse tape recording related to Watergate. We'll never know what was on that 18 minutes. They've tried. 1974, the Freedom of Information Act passed by Congress over President Ford's veto. 1977, the first flight of the Concorde from London to New York, the supersonic jet. 1980, a devastating fire at the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas kills 84. Moving on to the 22nd, 1930, Elijah Muhammad forms the Nation of Islam in Detroit. 1935, the flying boat China Clipper takes off from Alameda, California, carrying 100,000 pieces of mail on the first trans-Pacific airmail flight. 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy is assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, allegedly, while riding in an open-top motorcade in Dallas, Texas, one of the darkest days in American history. 1976, the comic strip Kathy by Kathy Geisweit debuts. Let's move on to the 23rd now. 1852, just past midnight, a sharp jolt, likely caused by heavy rains, causes Lake Merced, California, to drop 30 feet, 9 meters. I don't know if that's our Lake Merced or they mean Merced, California. That's unclear. Let's just go with Lake Merced. It makes it local. 1937, John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men premieres in New York City. Tell me about the rabbits, George. Oh, I lost my place. Here we go. 1963, the debut of Doctor Who, the long-running British sci-fi series. Moving on to the 24th, 1859. English naturalist Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of the Species, radically changing the view of evolution and laying the foundation for evolutionary biology, which we are still arguing about. 1874, American inventor Joseph Glidden patents barbed wire. 1954, Air Force One, the first U.S. presidential plane, is christened. The Columbine II is a 1948 VC-121A Lockheed Constellation, or the Connie. It's one of the most beautiful airplanes ever created. And 1971, American D.B. Cooper hijacks a plane, extorts $200,000 ransom before jumping out of the plane over Washington State and is never seen again. Maybe he was the Scorpio killer. Or was that Ted Cruz? Let's now move on to our births for today. Starting with the 18th, Louis-Jacques Daguerre. I hope I pronounced that right. I always flub French. Anyway, he was the French inventor and photographer, the daguerreotype. 1797, Sojourner Truth, African-American abolitionist and feminist. 1836, William Gilbert, English dramatist, librettist, poet, and illustrator. Gilbert and Sullivan. I've got a little list, and to relate that back to Groucho. If you've never seen or heard Groucho's Mikado, now, they butchered it to get it down to an hour, but he's delightful in it as the Lord High Executioner. 1908, Imogene Coca, American comedian, seen on Your Show of Shows, and of course, National Lampoon's Vacation. 1945, Wilma Mankiller, Native American activist, first woman chief of the Cherokee Nation. Moving on to the 19th, 1917, Indira Gandhi, the fourth Prime Minister of India. 1936, Dick Cavett, talk show host. Sorry about that. 1942, fashion designer Calvin Klein. 1976, Jack Dorsey, American computer programmer, co-founder of Twitter. Moving on to the 20th. 1889, Edwin Hubble, namesake of the Hubble Space Telescope, American astronomer, discoverer of galaxies, the redshift, and he did a lot of that at the Mount Wilson Observatory that was in danger from the wildfires a couple months ago, but made it through. 1900, Chester Gould, American cartoonist, the creator of Dick Tracy. I love that strip. You know, it got kind of weird in the 60s with the Space Coupe and Moon Maid and Giant Escargot and one of the police officers who was named Groovy. Yeah, it got a little weird. 1925, Robert F. Kennedy would be 95. Wow. And 1942, happy birthday to President-elect Joe Biden. Let's move on to the 21st, 1694, Voltaire. 1898, the British surrealist René Magritte. 1937, Marlo Thomas. Now, she was in that series, That Girl. And for those of you that followed the series, you know, she and her fiance, Don Hollinger, got engaged in the last season. They were just about set to be married, and the series ended. And so I always wondered, did they ever get married? Was the episode left off the reruns? Wasn't sure. I actually wrote to Marlo Thomas, and she replied, no, they never married because Anne-Marie, her character, had become a women's liberationist. So there you go. Awfully nice of her to reply. Thank you, Marlo, if you're tuning in. Say hi to Phil. And 1948, George Zimmer, former executive chairman and former CEO of the Men's Warehouse. You're going to love it. Let's move on to the 22nd, 1888, the birth date of Tarzan of the Apes, according to author Edgar Rice Burroughs. 1890, Charles de Gaulle, president of France. 1893, Harley Earl, a name that may not be familiar unless you're a car enthusiast. He was an automobile designer for GM, first head of design at GM, actually, General Motors, designed, the Corvette, the 1956 Chevy Bel Air, the iconic Cadillacs of the 50s and 60s. 1898, Wiley Post, American aviator, first solo flight around the world. 1969, Marjane Satrapi, Iranian graphic novelist, did the Persepolis series, wonderful series of graphic novels. She has others too. Check out her work, it's great. In 1859, I don't know how this got confused. This must be the 23rd, yes. 1859, Billy the Kid. And 1950, Senator Chuck Schumer, minority leader of the Senate. Moving on to the 24th, 1864, Toulouse-Lautrec, the wonderful artist, illustrator. 1916, Forrest J. Ackerman, a tremendous collector of science fiction movie memorabilia, and actually coined the term sci-fi, according to my sources. 1925, William F. Buckley Jr., the conservative commentator and magazine editor, among things. 1935, Ron Dellums, American politician from Oakland. He represented Oakland in the House of Representatives from 1971 to 1998 and was as also former mayor of Oakland. 1946, Ted Bundy, American serial killer. Well, speaking of death, let's move on to our deaths in history now. Beginning with the 18th, 1922, Marcel Proust, Proust, French intellectual and author. 1969, Joseph P. Kennedy, the head of the Kennedy clan. 1976, the artist Man Ray. 1978, Leo J. Ryan, we just talked about, was killed with 4 others in Jonestown, Guyana by members of the People's Temple. 2017, Mother Flawless Sabrina, whose real name was Jack Doroshow, American LGBTQ activist and drag queen who was a pioneer for transgender people and drag queens as well. Let's move on to the 19th, 1887, Emma Lazarus, American poet, wrote the poem that's on the Statue of Liberty, Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning, and all that. 2017, it came up earlier, Charles Manson died of natural causes at 83. Moving on to the 20th, 1910, Leo Tolstoy, Russian novelist. 1975, Spanish dictator Francisco Franco, and he's still dead. Fans of the early Saturday Night Live will get that one. Moving on to the 21st, 1963, Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, who we talked about earlier. Moving on to the 22nd, 1718, Blackbeard, the notorious English pirate. 1916, Jack London, American activist and author, Call the Wind, important person here in San Francisco history, Bay Area. 1963, speaking of authors, Aldous Huxley, and also 1963, as we said earlier, John F. Kennedy. Also 1963, J.D. Tippit, American police officer, murdered right after the assassination by Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm pretty sure he did that one. 1993, Anthony Burgess, British novelist and essayist, A Clockwork Orange. Moving on to the 23rd, 1902, Walter Reed, U.S. Army physician and bacteriologist who proved mosquitoes transmit yellow fever. And of course, the Walter Reed Army Hospital is named in his honor. 1957, Diego Rivera, great artist, husband of Frida Kahlo. In 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was assassinated by Jack Ruby. For our quote today, we thought we would end with one from JFK in his honor. What is famous so often is that quote of his, the speech he gave of why we go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. And wait, I'll get to it. We choose to go to the moon and do the other thing. So it really, I don't like unanswered questions, in case you couldn't tell. And so I wondered for many, many years, what was the other thing? or things actually is what he said. And so this is pre-internet. So I got a book of all of Kennedy's speeches, looked the speech up, and well, here's the quote that explains what the other things are. So if you have been wondering all these decades, you will now know if you didn't know already. But why some say the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We chose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon this decade, I think he said, and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Now you know. Well, that wraps it up for this edition. Now, don't forget, as we said at the beginning, we're only doing 2 more tours this month because of the rising COVID rates. We don't want to endanger anybody. We don't want to be endangered ourselves. If you do sign up for those 2 tours, just know this, masks are required, and as is social distancing. I'm carrying hand sanitizer, latex gloves, extra masks. Go to EmperorNortonTour.com to sign up. If you have any difficulty, email me at EmperorNortonTour@gmail.com. We'll get you on those tours if you want to go. But hopefully after the new year sometime, we'll be able to start up again. Also, if you'd like to leave a tip, it is greatly appreciated. We just had another wonderful donation the other day. Truly touched by it. So you can do a monthly subscription via Patreon or one-time donation via PayPal or Venmo. We greatly appreciate our generous donors. We could not do this without you. So thank you all so much. If you'd like more information about the tours, well, here's that once again. So until we see you again, stay safe, stay healthy. If you go outside, wear a mask. We are getting really tired of seeing this. What we're getting even more tired of is seeing people without masks or the mask pulled down below the nose or on the chin. Yeah, that doesn't work. You're killing people. It's that simple. You are killing people. Be kind to one another. Accept the outcome of the election. Don't take unproven cures that might kill you. Until we see you again, a gracious good day.